Hello, my friends. Welcome to Timeline English. I am so glad you are here today. Take a slow breath, find a comfortable place, and let this story begin. Imagine a stadium in New Jersey, packed with 80,000 people on a warm July night in the year 2026. The biggest match in football has just ended. Spain have beaten Argentina to become champions of the world. And in the middle of the golden confetti falling from the night sky, a 19-year-old boy drops to his knees on the grass, points up toward the sky, and closes his eyes. A few feet away, an older man walks toward him, a man who has scored more goals, won more trophies, and carried more expectation than almost anyone in the history of the sport. His name is Lionel Messi, and tonight, for the first time in his long career, he has lost a World Cup final. The two players meet in the middle of the celebration. They embrace. And in that single quiet moment, watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world, something passes silently between them. An old legend and a new one standing where he once stood. The younger man's name is Lamine Yamal, and his story does not begin in a stadium at all. It begins in one of the poorest, most overlooked neighborhoods in Spain, a place most of the football world had never heard of, and might never have heard of, if not for him. But first, you must understand something about where this story begins. Rocafonda is a neighborhood in the coastal town of Mataró, about 30 kilometers north of Barcelona, Spain. It is not a wealthy place. Studies suggest that roughly half of the people who live there survive below the poverty line. Many families in Rocafonda came from Morocco, from Senegal, from Ecuador, and many other countries, immigrants who came to Spain searching for a better life and often found instead a difficult, uncertain one. Remember this place, because everything that follows grows directly out of it. Lamine Yamal Nasraoui Ebana was born on the 13th of July, 2007, in a town just outside Barcelona. His father, Munir, had come from Morocco. His mother, Sheila, had come from Equatorial Guinea. Like so many immigrant families building a new life in a new country, money was tight from the very beginning. Some months, paying rent was a genuine struggle. Around the time Lamine was born, his family faced one of those difficult months, and two men who knew them chose, quietly and without asking for anything in return, to help. Instead of pressing for money that was owed, they told his father to take care of his newborn son first and worry about the rest later. It was a small act of kindness, but Lamine's father never forgot it. And so, when it came time to name his son, he chose to honor the two men who had helped his family in a difficult moment, rather than any famous person at all. Their names were Lamine and Yamal. Millions of football fans around the world now know this name. Very few of them know where it actually came from. When Lamine was 3 years old, his parents separated. His mother moved to a nearby town called Granollers. His father and grandmother stayed behind in Rocafonda. Lamine grew up moving between both homes, but it was Rocafonda's cracked concrete streets that would shape the way he played, and in many ways, the way he lived. On those streets, football was not played on soft green grass. It was played between parked cars, on hard, uneven concrete, often against boys years older and far stronger than he was. He was small. He was often knocked down, but according to people who knew him then, he always got back up, and he almost always did it smiling. There is a particular kind of lesson you learn playing football in a place like Rocafonda, a lesson no coach can really teach you. You learn to think fast, because the ball moves fast on concrete. You learn not to complain when someone bigger pushes you over. And you learn, more than anything else, that fear is a luxury you cannot really afford. If you hesitate on those streets, someone else takes the ball. If you're afraid to try something difficult, you never get another chance. So you play without fear, not because you were born brave, but because the alternative is standing on the sideline while everyone else plays without you. At 6 years old, Barcelona's scouts noticed him. He was invited to train with the club's famous youth academy, La Masia, a place that had already produced some of the greatest players in the history of the sport. And in 2007, the very year Lamine was born, one of those players, a young Argentine forward named Lionel Messi, was already 20 years old and beginning to show the world exactly what he could do in Barcelona's first team. Neither Messi nor anyone else in that stadium could have imagined, on the day a photograph was taken of him gently holding a 6-month-old baby boy at the club's training ground, that this same child would one day wear the very same shirt he wore and stand beside him on the biggest stage in football 19 years later. That photograph existed for years without the wider world knowing about it. Lamine's father chose to keep it private for a long time, unwilling to let journalists compare his young son to one of the greatest players who ever lived, before the boy had even kicked a ball professionally. Only years later, once his son had already become a rising star in his own right, did he finally share it publicly. But long before any of that, there was simply a small boy, arriving at La Masia for the first time, having somehow forgotten his football boots at home. A coach found him an old, ill-fitting pair to borrow. They were too big for his small feet. He said nothing about it. He simply walked out onto the pitch and began to play. According to the coaches who watched that day, within minutes, they had stopped talking to each other entirely. They simply stood and watched. One of those coaches later said the boy did things nobody had ever taught him, things that seemed to come from somewhere instinctive, whether from his upbringing on the streets of Rocafonda or simply something he was born with. Whatever it was, he had something the other children did not, a total absence of fear. Years passed. Lamine grew up inside the structured, demanding world of Barcelona's youth system, while still returning, again and again, to Rocafonda, to his father, to his grandmother, to the same cracked streets where he had first learned to play. By the age of 11, he was already captaining Catalonia's regional youth team, a clear early sign of the leadership and composure that would later define him on much bigger stages. Then, on the evening of the 29th of April, 2023, everything changed. Barcelona were leading Real Betis 4-0 at Camp Nou, deep into the closing minutes of the match. The head coach, Xavi Hernandez, turned toward the substitutes bench and called out a name few watching in the stadium recognized, Lamine Yamal. A slight, thin 15-year-old walked toward the sideline. He was 15 years, 9 months, and 16 days old, about to become the youngest player to ever appear for Barcelona's first team in over 100 years of the club's history. He walked onto the pitch at Camp Nou, one of the most famous stadiums in the world, and by every account from that night, he did not look nervous at all. He simply looked around once, then jogged calmly to his position, as though he were stepping onto just another concrete pitch back in Rocafonda. After the match, Xavi told reporters he had simply instructed the boy to go out and try things without fear, and that was exactly what he did. But Barcelona in 2023 was not just any club searching for young talent. For nearly 2 decades, one man had carried the club on his shoulders, the very same Lionel Messi who had once knelt down awkwardly to hold a baby he barely knew how to hold. Messi had left Barcelona in 2021, and in the years since, the club had struggled to find its former brilliance. Every promising young player who emerged from La Masia afterward, was asked, fairly or not, the very same question: "Are you the next Messi?" When journalists asked Lamine this same question, he never seemed bothered by it. He simply said he did not compare himself to anyone, that he only thought about playing the game in front of him. It was, in its own quiet way, the truest expression of the mentality Rocafonda had given him. Worry less about the size of the moment and simply play. By September of 2023, Spain's senior national team came calling. Not the youth teams he had played for before, but the full senior side. He was still only 16 years old. His first match came against Georgia. He entered the game before halftime, with Spain already leading comfortably. In the 74th minute, a cross rolled toward him at the edge of the penalty area. He took a calm touch, looked up, and fired the ball into the top corner of the net. 16 years and 57 days old, the youngest player in the entire history of the Spanish national team to ever score a goal. The record he broke had belonged, until that very moment, to one of his own Barcelona teammates. By the summer of 2024, Lamine was still only 16 years old when Spain traveled to Germany for the European Championship. Few expected much from a young Spanish squad facing established football powers like France, England, and the host nation itself. And on the right wing of that young Spanish team stood a teenager who, on paper, had no business competing at this level at all. The tournament's real test came in the semi-final on the 9th of July, 2024, in Munich, against a powerful French team built around one of the fastest players in the world, Kylian Mbappe. France scored first, in only the 9th minute. For a young, inexperienced Spanish side, it would have been easy to lose belief entirely. 12 minutes later, the ball reached Lamine on the right wing, roughly 25 meters from goal, two French defenders closing in quickly on either side of him. He did not rush. He cut inside onto his stronger left foot, found a small pocket of space, and struck the ball toward goal in one smooth motion. It curled through the air in a long, bending arc. The French goalkeeper, one of the finest in the world, dived with everything he had. His fingertips reached the ball, but could not stop it. It kissed the inside of the far post and dropped into the net. 16 years and 362 days old. The youngest player ever to score a goal at a European Championship, a record that had stood untouched since 1958, when it was set by a 17-year-old Brazilian named Pele. 66 years of football history, broken in a single calm motion by a boy from Rocafonda who barely celebrated before jogging back to his position. Spain won that semi-final 2-1 and advanced to the final itself, against England, played in Berlin on the 14th of July, the day after Lamine's own 17th birthday. 17 years and 1 day old, he became the youngest player ever to appear in a European Championship final, and in fact the youngest player ever to appear in any major international football final in the history of the sport. Early in the second half of that final, Lamine collected the ball on the right wing once again, danced past a defender, and rolled a low cross across the penalty area. His teammate, Nico Williams, finished it into the net. England fought back and briefly equalized, but Spain found a late winning goal in the 86th minute. Final score, 2-1. Spain were champions of Europe. Lamine, 17 years and 1 day old, was named the tournament's best young player. As fireworks lit up the German night sky above the stadium, he lifted the trophy alongside his teammates. And then, in the middle of the celebration, he did something small and quiet that most of the watching world did not immediately understand. He raised his hands in front of his face and formed a number with his fingers, 304. The final three digits of the postal code for Rocafonda, the neighborhood where families sometimes carried their belongings out onto the street because they could no longer afford the rent. The neighborhood where he had once played barefoot on borrowed courage between parked cars. He was now the champion of Europe, standing on one of the biggest stages in world sport, and the very first thing he chose to do was send a message, not to the cameras, but to a single street back home. After that summer, everything around Lamine's life changed at extraordinary speed. Sponsorship offers arrived by the dozens. Magazines wanted him on their covers. He was given Barcelona's number 10 shirt, the very same number Messi himself had once worn for so many years, and it quickly became one of the best-selling football shirts anywhere in the world. In September of 2025, still only 18 years old, Lamine stood on the stage in Paris for the Ballon d'Or ceremony, football's most prestigious individual award. He did not win that particular night. The prize went instead to his own Barcelona teammate, Ousmane Dembele, with Lamine finishing as the runner-up. By most accounts, Lamine responded with the same composure that had defined him since he was a boy, saying simply that he was happy for his teammate and that he would keep working toward the next opportunity. That next great opportunity arrived less than a year later, in the summer of 2026, when the World Cup came to North America, hosted jointly by the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Spain entered the tournament as one of the favorites, unbeaten in an extraordinary run of matches stretching back years. Lamine, still only 19 years old, had never once lost a single match he had played in for the senior national team, an almost unheard-of record heading into a World Cup. Spain progressed steadily through the tournament, defeating Cape Verde, South Africa, and continuing forward through the knockout stages. And waiting for them in the final, on the 19th of July, 2026, in New Jersey, was Argentina, led by the very man whose photograph with a 6-month-old baby had once been kept hidden from the world for 16 years, Lionel Messi. It was, in a very real sense, the match football had been waiting years to see. The two players had crossed paths only once before, in a special exhibition match the previous spring. But this time, the stakes could not have been higher. A World Cup final. A living legend nearing the end of his extraordinary career, against the teenager many now believed was destined to inherit his place at the very top of the sport. The match itself was tense and tightly contested. Argentina's defense proved extraordinarily difficult to break down, and the entire 90 minutes of normal time ended without a single goal from either side. The match went to extra time. Argentina, already playing with 10 men after a red card in the closing minutes of regulation, grew increasingly stretched. And in the 106th minute, a substitute named Ferran Torres finally broke the deadlock, sending Spanish fans in the stadium and around the world into pure celebration. Spain held on to win, 1-0-0, world champions for the second time in their history. And there, in the middle of the celebration, on his knees on the grass with his eyes closed and his face turned toward the sky, was Lamine Yamal, 19 years old, a World Cup winner, a European champion, and, in the words of one former professional goalkeeper watching that night, a player who had, in the span of barely 3 years, quietly completed football itself. Moments later, he found Messi in the crowd of celebrating and consoling players, and the two men embraced. Some who witnessed it called it a passing of the torch, an old master and a young student meeting at the exact point where one career was winding down and the other was only just beginning to reach its full height. Lamine later posted a simple message online, almost completed the set. But for everyone who had followed his story from the very beginning, the truest measure of how far he had come was not the trophy itself, nor the records, nor the sponsorship deals, nor even the embrace with football's greatest ever player. It was something much smaller and much more personal. Even after everything, after Camp Nou, after Munich, after Berlin, after New Jersey, Lamine has never stopped returning to Rocafonda. He still visits the neighborhood. He still walks into the small local shops where the owners proudly display his signed shirts on their walls. He still hugs his grandmother in the same streets where he once played barefoot football between parked cars. Somewhere in that neighborhood today, painted onto a wall, is a simple message from the people who live there. More boys like Lamine Yamal, it reads, and fewer families forced from their homes. In other words, more children given the same chance he was given, and fewer families losing everything simply because they could not afford the rent. Those words say almost everything about the place that raised him, and about why, every single time he scores a goal on the biggest stages in the world, he still lifts 3 fingers, and then 4, 3, 0, 4, not for the cameras, for the streets that raised him. And so, my friends, the story of Lamine Yamal comes quietly to its close, for now, because at only 19 years old, his story is really only just beginning. A boy born into a family that struggled every month simply to pay the rent. A boy named after 2 strangers who once showed his family a small, unasked-for kindness. A boy who learned to play without fear on concrete streets because fear on those streets was simply a luxury he could not afford. And yet, in barely 3 years, he became the youngest player in the history of one of the greatest clubs in the world, the youngest goal scorer in the history of the Spanish national team, the youngest goal scorer in the history of the European Championship, a European champion, and, at 19 years old, a champion of the entire world. He made a choice, again and again, every single time he stepped onto a pitch far bigger than anything he had known growing up. He chose not to let the size of the stage change the way he played the game. He chose instead to carry Rocafonda with him everywhere he went. Now, my friend, I want to say something to you. You are making a choice too. Every time you press play on a story like this, you are choosing something. You are choosing to grow. You are choosing to learn. You are choosing to give your time and your effort to something that is not always easy, but something that truly matters. Learning English is not easy. There are days when the words feel heavy, when speaking out loud feels frightening, when you feel like everyone around you is faster, more confident, more ready than you are. Maybe, some days, you feel like a small boy standing on a cracked concrete street, playing against people far more experienced than you, wearing boots that do not quite fit yet. But look at what Lamine built simply by refusing to let fear decide how he played. He did not wait until he felt ready before stepping onto the biggest stages in the world. He simply walked out again and again and trusted what he had already built inside himself long before anyone else was watching. You are building something too. Every word you understand, every sentence you follow from beginning to end, every small moment when English starts to feel a little less like a wall and a little more like an open door, that is proof. Proof that you are more capable and more ready than you think. Lamine turned a childhood shaped by hardship into a career that has already reached the very top of world football. You are turning quiet, patient effort into a skill that will open doors in your own life that you cannot yet fully imagine. Keep listening, keep learning, keep going, and remember, wherever you come from, you are always allowed to carry it proudly with you. This is Timeline English. If Lamine's story moved you today, please leave a comment below. Tell me, what is your own 304? The place or the people who shaped who you are, no matter how far you travel from them. I would love to hear your thoughts. There are many more stories waiting right here. Come back soon, my friend.